A months-long NBC5 investigation, sexual assault victims left in limbo.
It takes so much to come forward. It takes so much to go through that exam.
A troubled police crime lab, missing deadlines for testing evidence hundreds and hundreds of times.
A department that delays is helping a rapist. A department that delays is impacting a rape survivor.
This is a police department. Why is the police department not following the law?
The police department is outsourcing because within we don't have the ability to test all those cases.
Reports drawing a swift response from city leaders.
We have failed victims in our city.
And they're pissed off. And they should be. I'm pissed off.
And we expose how gaps in police staffing have also impacted victims of decades-old unsolved murders.
It's wrong. We're angry. We're forgotten.
An inside look at our investigation sparking action.
I am so sorry.
To fix problems that left justice shelved.
I'm senior investigative reporter Scott Friedman. Texas passed a law in 2019 to eliminate a statewide backlog of untested rape kits. It set strict deadlines for police and crime labs to process kits. But 5 years later, records we obtained showed Fort Worth police often missed those deadlines by months or even years, leaving hundreds of victims waiting for answers.
It began with a night out, celebrating a friend's birthday at a club. It ended in a Fort Worth parking lot where Latrice Godfrey says an acquaintance who gave her a ride home stopped the car and then raped her.
It's just...
Family members took her to a Fort Worth hospital for a sexual assault examination.
I didn't know what a rape kit is or what it would do.
She completed the testing process, then met with detectives and prosecutors who eventually obtained a grand jury indictment against the man accused of assaulting her. But as the case moved forward, Latrice wondered about the status of that rape kit, the key physical evidence.
So I said, hey, did they test my kit? She said, no, not yet. I'm like, okay. Is this normal?
Latrice says she would periodically log into the state's Track It system, where victims can check the status of their kit. Almost a year later, the system showed it still wasn't processed.
11 months.
11 months.
Almost an entire year, and the kit had not even been tested?
Have not been tested.
Under a Texas law that took effect in 2019, police departments must submit each kit to a lab within 30 days of receiving it, and labs must complete testing within 90 days.
But NBC5 Investigates has obtained state records showing Fort Worth police have frequently failed to meet those deadlines over the last 5 years.
Out of more than 1,700 kits collected, 767 arrived late at the lab, meaning police missed the 30-day deadline 43% of the time. 412 were submitted more than 100 days late, 28 more than a year late. And hundreds of kits were not lab tested in the required 90 days. Records the state provided us in early October showed Fort Worth police had 901 kits still awaiting completion of the testing and analysis process, and already passed the 90-day deadline.
It takes so much to come forward. It takes so much to go through that exam for it to be mishandled and just to be sitting on the shelf like, oh, we get to it when we get to it, when my healing journey is relying on that.
Fort Worth is the only police department in Texas with its own forensic biology lab. So how does a department that can do its own testing miss deadlines hundreds of times? Fort Worth police turned down our request to speak with the lab staff, directing us instead to a public information officer.
This is a police department. Why is the police department not following the law?
The police department is outsourcing because within we don't have the ability to test all those cases.
But even if they're outsourced, it's supposed to be completed within 90 days, and you run a lab. You're a unique police department. You have a lab in-house.
Our lab has 2 people that are able to do cases right now, or 3 positions that are filled.
Sergeant Leah Wagner explained, like many labs across the state, Fort Worth has struggled to hire forensic scientists who can conduct DNA testing. Of the 3 currently on staff, 2 are still in a 2-year-long training process and cannot conduct DNA tests on their own.
This is the 12th largest city in the United States.
You're right. And
How does the department get to the point where you have only 3 people on staff that can conduct this very important testing?
so we have 8 spots that are allotted. 5 are vacant at this time. They've tried recruiting.
The department says the lab was so short-staffed it was unable to conduct any rape kit testing for 7 months in 2021, creating a bigger backlog. And Wagner says the department has difficulty finding private labs willing to accept enough kits to clear the backlog.
If they've cut you off, how are you going to send them if they said no more? Where do you send them if they tell you no more?
So you're saying this is the fault of labs not taking the kits from you. That's why you're not submitting them in the required time?
I'm saying that's part of the problem.
Law enforcement should be following the law.
State Representative Victoria Niave Criado authored the law that set the testing deadlines. She says the state has made tens of millions of dollars available to police departments so they can send kits to private labs and clear backlogs.
The funding is there. There is no excuse for a rape kit to not be timely submitted and tested.
You know, those are people. Those are not just kits. Those are not just trinkets on a shelf.
Lavinia Masters knows how testing delayed can mean justice denied. The law creating the testing deadlines is named for Masters. She was sexually assaulted in Dallas at 13 years old. Her kit sat on a shelf for 21 years. By the time her attacker was identified, the statute of limitations had run out.
We cannot have that mindset that these kids are so old that they don't matter. These victims matter.
During our interview with Fort Worth police, they suggested victims who want their kit tested on time should repeatedly call the department and ask for testing.
The more that you come forward and say, hey, I need to know this, the more it lets that detective know, hey, this person, we really need to push forward. Because
But should those victims have to beg the department to conduct the test, or should the department just do the test the way the law requires?
the test is going to be done regardless. Even if it's done a little later because of a backlog, that test is still being done.
A department that delays is helping a rapist. A department that delays is impacting a rape survivor.
Representative Niave Criado believes the state needs to create incentive programs to help labs recruit and retain more DNA analysts. But she says city leaders also need to use funding already available to seek out more private labs to help. Fort Worth police told us they're trying to identify additional labs, but could not provide an estimate on when they might clear the backlog.
We care about these people. We care about our victims. We care about everybody. We are hampered by the tools that we're being given or not given.
Latrice Godfrey says the delay in her testing made her feel police didn't care.
What did this do to your trust in the system, the justice system?
It damaged it. It just shattered it.
Prosecutors eventually dropped the charges against the suspect in her case, one day after the man's attorney argued his client was being denied the right to a speedy trial. The Tarrant County District Attorney's Office tells us testing delays were not a factor in what they said was a difficult decision to drop the case after careful consideration of all of the evidence. But Latrice still wonders if a delay played a role, and she's speaking out, hoping police will process future evidence in the time required by law.
I would appreciate that no one behind me will have to go through what I am going through.
Within hours of our first report, Fort Worth City Council leaders reacted with deep concern, pledging to move swiftly to address the backlog.
What I can promise you is we will do better.
You're almost talking about 1,000 cases, and those victim lives have been changed forever, and it's our duty to help them get past it.
And within days, Fort Worth's police chief appeared at a city council meeting where he made a remarkable apology.
We know it is completely unacceptable where we are.
The chief's comments were forceful and direct, saying sexual assault survivors have a right to be angry with his department for failing to process hundreds of rape kits in the time required by state law.
And they're pissed off, and they should be. I'm pissed off. If this was my daughter, my wife, my mother, I would be as well.
Earlier this month, an NBC5 investigation revealed state records showing Fort Worth police had about 900 rape kits already past a 90-day state deadline, and the full testing and analysis process was not complete. And more than 750 times over the last 5 years, the state record showed, the department failed to even submit kits for processing in a state-required 30-day time frame. One woman who reported an assault, Latrice Godfrey, told us how she waited almost a year for results.
11 months.
11 months. 11
Almost
months.
an entire year, and the kit had not even been tested?
Have not been tested.
Delays that have sparked anger and frustration among the city's top elected officials.
I am almost shaking. I'm just very unhappy with this information. We have failed victims in our city. We have failed not just victims, but we have failed their loved ones.
At today's council meeting, the chief laid out a plan to clear the backlog by April and said he and an assistant chief will personally manage the city's crime lab until the problem is solved. He said every option is on the table, including using more private contractors, incentive pay for lab staff to work extra hours, and hiring bonuses to fill 5 vacant lab positions that the city is now advertising on social media. Vacancies which police say have caused the delays.
I take full responsibility for the situation we're in right now, and I take full responsibility for correcting this and getting this right.
Mayor Matty Parker responded, telling the chief if Fort Worth is going to have its own crime lab going forward, it must be best in class.
But this crime lab has been a problem in the city of Fort Worth for 10 years. And I mention that, Chief, because it's not just your problem. It is a management problem, and it, at this point now, lies at our feet to solve it.
The mayor also paused to acknowledge Latrice Godfrey for speaking out about the delays. Godfrey listening from the audience and joined by Lavinia Masters, a sex assault survivor whose name is on the state law that created the testing deadlines.
And it is unfortunate that it's taken a public outcry and a beautiful victim in Latrice Godfrey, who's here today, to say, help me.
And as Godfrey and Masters left the meeting today, a personal apology from the police chief.
Not long after that meeting, Chief Noakes sat down with NBC5 Investigates for his first in-depth interview about the backlog. And he acknowledged the total number of kits that have missed the 90-day deadline is even higher than 900. In fact, more than 1,200 times over 5 years, the department failed to process sex assault evidence in the time required by state law. And the chief told us he knew about the problem almost a year before our reporting made it public. When did you first become aware that the department was behind to the tune of hundreds and hundreds of cases?
I think the first time I remember hearing anything was back in September of last year.
By December of 2023, state records we've obtained show Fort Worth's backlog of sex assault evidence was growing. 772 rape kits were not completed and already beyond the state's 90-day testing and analysis deadline.
Were folks not keeping you in the loop on what was happening to clear these cases? Do you feel like information was being withheld? Who ultimately is accountable for this?
I am. Ultimately, I'm accountable for this, and I'm not going to blame them for the information not getting to me. I don't believe anybody was withholding it intentionally. But as the leader of this department, it's my job when I know there's a problem to make sure I'm checking back. If I don't hear back, I can't just assume no news is good news.
Noakes says he made leadership changes at the crime lab and felt staff was focused on clearing the backlog. But he blames himself for not doing enough to make sure that was happening. By the time NBC5 Investigates uncovered the backlog, it had grown to about 900 cases. But Noakes acknowledged that over the last 5 years, the total number of cases that missed the 90-day deadline was even higher. 1,218 times, he says, the department failed to comply.
What goes through your mind when you look at that number? That's an enormous number.
It's completely unacceptable. It's ridiculous. There's no reason it should ever be that big. We shouldn't even be talking about 1 or 2, quite frankly. But you're talking over 1,000, over 1,200 cases that missed the deadline. It's unacceptable.
Noakes said staff had already worked to cut the existing backlog to about 600. He said the department was close to hiring 4 DNA analysts to fill vacant positions that slowed testing. And he's asking the city for a consultant to examine the lab, suggesting if it can't be a model of excellence, it could be shut down.
Once they have a good idea of where we are and where we could go, should we even have a lab?
He says victims deserve answers.
And we are absolutely committed not just to correcting this problem, but making sure going forward we never end up in this situation again.
The chief believes the department can clear the backlog before an April deadline he's set to complete all delayed cases. The department said it immediately sent more kits to private labs for testing, and that it would offer incentive pay to the city's own lab staff to work extra hours to complete cases. And within weeks of our first reports, a U.S. senator stepped in to help. Senator John Cornyn announced $2.1 million in federal grant funds for Fort Worth and Tarrant County to help address the backlog. Fort Worth isn't the only North Texas city where we discovered police have missed state deadlines. Our reporting found cases of justice shelved in cities including Arlington and Irving.
As a result of our questions and requests for records, Irving police say they launched an immediate review and have changed some of their evidence handling procedures. The department's records showed over 5 years about 3 dozen kits were submitted to a lab after the 30-day submission deadline. To avoid that, the department says it will now pick up kits from hospitals and deliver them immediately to the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Sciences, the regional lab the department uses. In Arlington, records showed out of 624 kits collected in 5 years, 23 were late to the lab. In 4 cases, Arlington submitted late explanation forms to the state. In one, they wrote, "This is due to the unit having a shortage of detectives and an overwhelming amount of sexual assault cases." An Arlington PD spokesman tells us that unit is now back to full staffing. Because of our questions, the department said it conducted a full-scale review and found more cases, 29 total, where a kit was submitted late. The spokesman said the majority of those kits were submitted within a week of the 30-day period expiring. In the future, the department says its evidence unit will notify detectives when 20 days have passed to ensure they have greater awareness of deadlines. Arlington says no late kits impacted the outcome of cases.
At the state capitol, officials also took notice of our reporting. Senate Criminal Justice Committee staff said they would look into what's happened in Fort Worth as the committee studies how to eliminate any rape kit backlogs.
We will, yes, absolutely. I think we just got this latest report a couple of days ago from DPS. And so, yes, we're going to reach out to these, see if there's something else going on that we need to know about.
At an interim hearing in Austin, lawmakers talked about the statewide shortage of crime lab DNA analysts and how to recruit them and keep them through what can be a 2-year on-the-job training process. Some forensic scientists have proposed a new state apprenticeship program pairing universities with crime labs to build a better pipeline of applicants, an idea that seems to be gaining traction with lawmakers.
My pledge is we will work with the locals. If it needs more trained people, if we need to work with higher ed to see how we open up and get more forensic testers trained, we will work with you on that.
We spoke to forensic labs across the states that say the industry is truly experiencing a hiring crisis. But after our first reports, we also heard from families of crime victims who told us staffing shortages at Fort Worth PD are affecting more than just the police lab.
It's ridiculous. There's no way.
It's deplorable.
When we come back, why the families of some of the city's most high-profile unsolved murder victims tell us a lack of staff has left justice shelved in decades-old cases. We'll show you what happened when we took their concerns to the top. And if you've experienced a delay in testing, we have a link to contact NBC5 Investigates. Search Justice Shelved at NBCDFW.com. We've also posted a list of resources for survivors of sexual assault. Families of murdered and missing people fed up with what they describe as a lack of action from Fort Worth police. Relatives of some of the city's most high-profile cold case victims contacted us after seeing our reporting about the troubled Fort Worth Police Crime Lab. Those families tell NBC5 Investigates short staffing in Fort Worth PD's cold case unit has delayed action in decades-old cases and left them feeling forgotten.
It's a group these families never wanted to join.
My name's Jan Webster, and this is my baby sister.
My name's Dave Ward, and this is my mother, Jean Mulder Ward.
She was Murdered on Christmas Day in 1980.
She was found naked and strangled with a bra strap.
This is my mom, Gloria Choice.
Scotty Choice's mom was found murdered in a vacant Fort Worth apartment building.
That's my brother.
Cheryl Buchanan's brother Thurlow disappeared in 1987.
This is my niece, Julie Mosley.
Sandy Harcum's niece is one of Fort Worth's missing trio, 3 teenagers who vanished 2 days before Christmas, 1974. Families united by loss and grief and now frustration, they say, with a lack of response from Fort Worth police.
It's wrong. We're angry. We're forgotten.
Forgotten because they say Fort Worth PD's cold case unit is severely understaffed. The department confirms the unit has just 1 full-time detective, 2 part-time reserve officers, and 1,000 cold cases.
It's ridiculous. There's no way.
No matter how dedicated, how passionate you are, you cannot work 1,000 cases. Nor can you go through the cases to see which ones are workable.
Kim Cadell helps lead a support group of the cold case families. She says the staffing in the cold case unit reminds her of the situation NBC5 Investigates exposed in Fort Worth PD's crime lab, which had 5 vacant positions, resulting in delays in more than 1,200 sex assault cases.
What parallels do you see between that situation and what's happening with these cases?
Pretty much the same issues as far as lack of manpower, lack of funds.
It's deplorable. As much as Fort Worth has grown and as big as we are, then, there needs to be more staffing.
Several of these families said to us, we feel forgotten.
They are not forgotten. I want them to know that.
In an interview, Fort Worth Police Chief Neil Noakes said his department is actively working any cold cases where new leads exist.
This is extremely important. Any way we can bring closure to any family or loved one of someone who was murdered, we want to make sure we do that.
But the families say they're unable to get answers to basic questions about the status of investigations.
You don't get responses. Or when you do, I'm going to get back with you, and they don't. I don't think I've ever had a return phone call.
They gonna call you back. They'll answer phones. You leave a message. They won't call you back.
Many would like to know about the status of DNA evidence in their cases and whether additional testing could be done.
Where do we sit? What do we have to work with, right? And then what are the criteria?
The families saw a glimmer of hope in 2020.
It was back in 1974 when police say Walker was abducted, tortured, and murdered.
When the 46-year-old murder of Carla Walker was solved. Fort Worth police sent DNA evidence to a private lab specializing in degraded DNA samples and genetic genealogy, which can identify even distant relatives of possible suspects to generate new leads.
And I know that technology's changed, and I know that there's something they could do. I'm just not sure why it's not getting done.
Some say they've asked but had no response.
How many of you feel the department has done a poor job of communicating about your cases? All of you.
We took the group's concerns to the chief.
Each of these families said to us, we'd like to know the status of our case. Is there DNA evidence that could be sent away? Can you get those answers to those families?
We can. We can get them those answers.
Noakes pledged that detectives will go through each case and determine if additional testing is possible.
And if there is something that we can send off to be tested, then absolutely we should make that happen.
Some of these families tell us they wait months or even a year for a response from the unit. Is that acceptable?
No, that's too long. It should not take that long for a response to come back.
The chief also promised to re-examine staffing in the weeks ahead to see if additional cold case detectives could help the department be more responsive to victims. And he offered this apology.
I am so sorry. The last thing we want is any victim of a crime or family member of a victim of a crime here in Fort Worth to feel that we don't care, to feel that they are forgotten.
They had lives. They deserve to know what happened. We deserve to know what happened.
For the families, it's more than curiosity. It's a deep need to comprehend events that altered their lives.
What would it mean to you to know?
Oh, a lot. It will give me peace.
It makes you part of who you are.
Dave Ward was 8 years old when his mom was murdered.
Do you have a daughter? Do you have a sister? Do you have a mother? You can probably imagine how this would feel.
An emptiness, a desire to know, and to advocate for those who were silenced.
Get some staffing, get them some help. One person can't do the job.
Chief Noakes told us the department is also working to digitize its cold case files from old paper records. He says that should help detectives better track the status of cases and DNA evidence. We will keep tracking the department's progress. We'll also stay on top of the backlog of sex assault evidence. The chief says hundreds of additional rape kits have been processed since our reporting began, and the department is optimistic it can eliminate the backlog by spring of 2025. You can find updates on the Justice Shelved series at NBCDFW.com, as well as our other NBC5 Investigates reports. I'm Scott Friedman. Thanks for watching.